everyone to this emergency Zoom on the war between Israel and Iran. Since October the 7th, 2023, every weekday in our Haaretz English editorial meeting, the head news editor begins his or her roundup of what we're covering with a stark date, but not a normal date. It counts how many days we've been at war. But for the last week, our meetings have been starting with 2 dates. This morning, our dates were day 621 of war in Gaza, day 6 of war in Iran. So, in the middle of the night between Thursday and Friday last week, Israel began airstrikes against Iran's nuclear and military capacities. By Friday evening, the first Iranian missile strikes were launched against Israel. Since then, Iran has launched over 400 ballistic missiles at Israel, killing 23 and injuring over 600. 4 of those victims were members of the same family from the Arab city of Tamra in the Galilee. Another of those victims was 7-year-old Nastia Borik, who had come to Israel from the Ukraine for cancer treatment and was killed in Bat Yam together with her mother, her cousins, and her grandmother. Iran has also launched 1,000 drones at Israel, but not one has hit its target. Israel, according to the IDF, has struck over 1,000 targets across Iran, with reports of 600 dead, alongside a campaign of assassinations of top military and intelligence figures. This is clearly a completely new situation for Israel and Iran and the Middle East in general, and its regional and global repercussions are now intensifying as the Trump administration considers whether to get involved as an active military participant. According to the US president today, the next week will be big, maybe less than a week. We just had an air raid, sirens going off in Tel Aviv. So if it happens again, which is a possibility, we will try to resume after about 10 to 15 minutes, but you can always check on the Haaretz site to see the extent of the barrage. First of all, let's just take stock of where we are. Thank you, Aluf Benn, the editor-in-chief of Haaretz, who is here with us this evening.
Hello.
And we're going to cover as much as we can. So the first question is, why is Israel at war with Iran right now?
Well, for several reasons. First of all, Iran has been calling for the destruction of Israel for 46 years, since the Islamic Revolution. Second of all, Israel and Iran have been trading, I would say, off the record or below the line or secret war for decades as well. Last year, for the first time, there was direct military exchange between Israel and Iran, when Iran, after retaliation, as a retaliation for Israeli assassination of one of its generals in Syria, launched missiles, ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and drones into Israel. Most of them did not pass through. Israel was protected by a coalition, including the United States, several Western and Arab states around us. And then again in October was another exchange during which Israel destroyed most of Iran's sophisticated air defenses. And then the 2 key allies of Iran across our border, the Lebanese Hezbollah, collapse after an Israeli sophisticated pager attack and the assassination of all its leadership. And then Assad, President Assad, the dictator of Syria, his regime collapsed, not because of Israel, but a combination of forces. And almost overnight, Iran lost its key allies across the Israeli border, and its main ability to inflict damage into Israel through Hezbollah that had, before the war, had a huge arsenal of missiles of all kinds and ranges and warheads. And then Israel faced a military opportunity to hit Iran with its air defenses reduced, not entirely demolished, but reduced, and without its allies, and with Israel more or less stuck in a quagmire in Gaza, where it cannot defeat Hamas and still cannot defeat Hamas and call it victory, with still 53 Israeli hostages held by Hamas as we speak. And so there was a call in Israel to move to the next target, which is to hit Iran directly and do away with its nuclear program that has been described by successive Israeli leaders since the 1990s as the gravest threat to the Jewish state ever, if and when Iran gets the bomb. And then in November, President Donald Trump, ex-President Donald Trump, won the American presidential election and was on his way back to the White House, pretty much to the hope of Prime Minister Netanyahu, who saw Trump as his ideological and political ally. And when Trump won the election, both leaders of the Israeli-Iranian divide reached strategic decisions. Netanyahu ordered the IDF to prepare for attacking Iran's nuclear facilities and parts of the regime and security apparatus there. And Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the leader of Iran, decided to haste nuclear enrichment to enrich as much uranium as possible to not to weapons grade level, but to one stage below, which means shorten the way until Iran could have enough fissile material for an arsenal of 10 to 15 nuclear bombs, according to the IAEA, to the international inspectors and specialists. And there was a race here between which would come first, the bomb or the bombing. The Israeli dilemma for the past 30 years, to bomb or to have Iran get the bomb. Now, for Netanyahu, this has been a lifelong mission. He's been warning against Iran since he was a backbencher in the early 1990s. As prime minister, as opposition leader, he coined the phrase, this is 1938, and Iran is Germany, and he's going to get the bomb. Time and again, his predictions that the point of no return was around the corner were disproved. So he was ridiculed both as an alarmist, but also in Israel, he was oftentimes reduced as a chicken, ridiculed as a chicken, would never dare to bomb Iran, unlike his predecessors, Begin, who bombed the Iraqi reactor in 1981, Ehud Olmert, who bombed the Syrian reactor in 2007. Netanyahu just talked and talked and talked, and Iran came closer and closer to the bomb. And I believe that he wanted to, at the personal level, both to reframe his legacy, that in the past 2 years, his legacy would be the October 7th disaster, the massacre of 1,200 Israelis by Hamas along the border, the hostages that are still there, the inability to reach the ultimate victory, pledged time and again by Netanyahu throughout the war, and also to stick to what he was preaching for almost 40 years about Iran. So
right.
Here we come.
Then you're saying that this really is Netanyahu's war, the war that he's been thinking and talking about for such a long time, in stark contrast to the war in Gaza, which is, not the war that he wants to be remembered for. But let's just go back a week ago. There were still anti-government protests in the street. There was the beginning of an anti-war movement. There were rising calls for refusals to serve. But now, with the Iran war, the support amongst the political opposition and the public seems to be almost unanimous. Is that is that true for a start? And secondly, is it because Israelis do actually see eye to eye with Netanyahu that Iran is an existential threat and that they don't see it as conflated with Netanyahu's desire for political survival as the Gaza war has become?
Well, I would divide it into, first of all, the opposition leaders did rally support. They stood behind Netanyahu. Many of them, when they were in office, different capacities, supported the bombing of Iran. For example, former Prime Minister and Defense Minister Naftali Bennett, who in November called the government to bomb Iran, and he's the front runner against Netanyahu in the public opinion surveys. Same is true of former Defense Minister Lieberman, former Prime Minister Barak, etc., etc. So, and most of these people, in opposition, they would say that the pilots and intelligence agents and so on did a great job, but they would not give so much credit to Netanyahu. But here's the thing: the mainstream Israeli thinking is always preferring bombing to diplomacy, and there's always the reminiscing of the Six-Day War, in 1967, in which within 3 hours, the Israeli Air Force destroyed the Egyptian Air Force. Egypt was the Iran of the 1960s, calling for the destruction of Israel, Nasser's Egypt. And there's always this yearning for this quick victory. This not wars of attrition, not guerrilla wars like the current fight with Hamas, or the 18 years of fighting in Lebanon in the last century. So what we see today is, first of all, happiness that once again the startup nation, the smart Israelis, the brave pilots were able to pull it through to attack Iran by surprise, bomb some of its nuclear facilities, kill its military leadership, its top nuclear scientists, etc., etc. On the other hand, it does not translate into support or trust in Netanyahu. Whoever believed that Netanyahu was God's send and the ultimate leader of Israel and his supporters definitely have more reasons to support Netanyahu. If those who stuck with Netanyahu after October 7 and whatever has happened in Gaza ever since are not going to ditch him now. To them, it's they say that they were right all along. But the opposition, those who don't want Netanyahu and fear that Netanyahu is only trying to stay in power, to turn Israel into an autocratic theocracy in some ways similar to Iran, or in Israel, Hebrew-speaking version of Iran, to them, they still doubt the reasons why Netanyahu did it, why he did it now, why he would not give a chance to Iranian-American talks on reaching a new nuclear deal. And to them, it was just a way out of Netanyahu from his corruption trial, from his coalition political trouble, from his inability to win in Gaza, and only attract more and more international criticism. He's under arrest warrant by the International Criminal Court for war crimes and crimes against humanity. This was a way out for Netanyahu. And as we see from tonight's polling by Channel 13, Netanyahu has not yet translated the first day of success in Iran into political gains. Bennett is still a formidable foe in an election scenario, although he's now not part of the political system. So far, there's not been a change in the way the Israeli public views Netanyahu.
Okay.
Let alone because this is not over yet. We still,
right.
we still have to
it's
see
certainly
the
not
outcome.
over yet. So he hasn't had the Khamenei bump yet, let's say, but we're early in the campaign so far. Now, I mean, there were years and years of very, very dire predictions about what would happen when this ultimate conflict came to pass between Israel and Iran. Predictions of, many, many dead on the Israeli home front. How do you assess the damage that Iran has managed to inflict on Israel so far? Obviously, we are talking so far. And how far were losses on the home front obviously calculated into the decision to attack Iran?
Most of these dire predictions were issued when Hezbollah was still with its full power and was viewed as a kind of the long arm of Iran strangling Israel from the north. Clearly, with the arsenal that Hezbollah had 2 years ago before the war, that could have inflicted huge damage on Israel with far shorter time for early warning, for going to the shelters, etc. So we have better protection because we can wait half an hour until those missiles reach Israel. Most people who have shelters or have access to shelters can hide. The Iranians have been able to pinpoint their attacks. They inflicted huge damage on the Weizmann Institute, one of Israel's top, or if not the top, scientific institution of Israel. Several military bases and the Haifa refinery that has been taken out of office, out of service due to an Iranian attack, and 23 people dead. Obviously, when you compare it to October 7 or to even the bus bombing is during the second Intifada, this is not the dire predictions that were there all along. But first of all, it's not over yet. And it could definitely develop into a war of attrition with like in Kiev and like in Kiev, which is hit every other day or so by Russian missiles. You have the economic devastation here. Most businesses are closed, schools are closed, although they are approaching summer holiday anyway. The airport is closed. Israelis cannot fly out. About 100,000 Israelis are stuck outside of Israel and trying to get in, so far mostly unsuccessfully. It's not something that could be sustained for years now, and if it will, it's going to be very, very difficult for Israel to sustain. So Israel cannot fight this war endlessly, or would not want to fight this war
Is that the
endlessly.
reason that, the IDF came out yesterday with a statement saying that no, it wasn't the IDF, it was a security source saying that, the target bank, the whole list of targets, of possible targets in Iran would be exhausted within a week or two. Is this just public messaging to kind of calm people down, or is that actually potentially true?
Trusting public messaging by government officials during war, any war, is like war is the first casualty. Truth is the first casualty of war, and this war is no different. We don't know. There's been a report in the Wall Street Journal that Israel was running out of interceptors, for the arrow interceptors for the missile defense system against the longer range Iranian missiles. You cannot fight that kind of missile war without missile defense. But I think the big hanging above us all is, what is President Trump going to do? At first he indicated that he was opposing an Israeli attack on Iran. And then the Americans tried to distance themselves from it. And then when they saw that the first raid was successful, Trump more and more is taking credit for it, and he says we are controlling the airspace of Iran, and it became we. And everybody likes to take a piece of success, but the great question is whether the United States, that has already assisted Israel with intelligence, with early warning data, with missile defense, is going to cross the threshold of protecting Israel through defensive means and also join the attack.
Okay, so wait, hold on a minute, because I want to quote you back to you, because you wrote about this recently, that America getting involved would be a huge step for America, but it's also a breaking of an enormous taboo for Israel as well. This is what you wrote. For the first time in its history, Israel is requesting that American military forces take part not only in defense, but in offensive action. And what is that action? The bombing of Iran's uranium enrichment facility in Fordo. So maybe we can just talk about why Israel, although it's managed to hit this huge spectrum of targets across Iran, including Natanz, which is also a nuclear site, and other nuclear sites as well. What is different about Fordo? Why is everyone talking about it so much? And why is Trump's decision whether to participate in a strike on Fordo, so critical? Where he goes on that decision?
Well, I think it's pretty clear, because just as much as Israeli officials were toying with the idea of bombing Iran for the past 25 years or so, 23 years since the disclosure of the existence of uranium enrichment in Iran, the Iranians were preparing for that eventuality, and therefore they built their most modern uranium enrichment facility at Fordo under a mountain, in a tunnel, big tunnel, which is very difficult to hit from the air. And again, according to the experts, the weapon systems that Israel deploys that are in service in the Israeli Air Force cannot penetrate its defenses. Iran has no air defense. You can fly over Fordo, you can bomb it, but should inflict very little damage. The only weapon system in service that could possibly or probably destroy that facility is the bunker busting bomb deployed by the American Air Force. But this can only be, it's a very big kind of munition. It can only be flown by a B-2 stealth bomber. It's the most sophisticated air weaponry system in the world. There are only 21 of them. They're only at the service of the US Air Force. They're not leased or given or sold to anyone else. And the only one who could decide to launch them to Fordo is Donald Trump. And again, they practiced this mission for years. It's not something that the Americans were not aware of. It's a matter of political decision. And on the other side comes Iran obviously cannot hit the United States, but Iran can hit, and now it's threatening, both the US military facilities in the Gulf. There are in Bahrain, in Qatar, and Saudi Arabia, and other places, and also the oil flow, because Iran can block the Straits of Hormuz and disrupt the oil supply, natural gas supply for the entire world, which means price hikes, which means queues at American gas stations. Very, very bad political thing for American presidents. And just as it happened during the 1973 Yom Kippur War and during the Iran-Iraq War in the early 1980s. So this is a very big consideration. It's not just about the operational stuff. The US could fly and bomb this facility. The facility cannot move. The facility cannot protect itself. The Iranians have had ample time to evacuate whoever is working there, to protect the area from radiation or whatever. So that's a very big decision. And Trump hinted at getting there, demanding unconditional surrender from Iran. Very big demand, echoing the World War II allies' demand from Hitler and from the Japanese leadership to surrender. And the Iranians pledged never to do that. So
Right. So
it's a very high stakes poker game now.
It's extremely high stakes because obviously that would turn it into a regional conflict.
It's not international, because if you raise the oil prices, if the oil prices rise from $80 to 200,
definitely a conflict that spreads across the Middle East.
Yeah, definitely. But again, Iran is short of allies because its main allies have been the only ally that supported Iran during the past 5-day war or 6-day war has been are the Houthis in Yemen, who fired 1 or 2 missiles towards Israel. Not a very major support. Hezbollah is on the sidelines with whatever residual force it has. The pro-Iranian militias in Iraq are out of play. Syria is now in the hands of a Sunni government that is not pro-Iranian. So it's mostly trying to inflict damage on America and its allies in the Gulf. But then again, face the wrath of whatever is in the possession of the United States and its allies.
Okay,
it's not an easy decision for Iran.
How do we understand the fact that Gulf states most of them have had, harsh words to be about Israel's attack on Iran, but what are they really thinking?
Well, during the war in Gaza, that was highly condemned, not only in the Arab world, but also in many, many circles in the West and other places. The only airlines that flew incessantly to Israel were the Israeli airlines and the Emirati airlines. The Saudis were still willing to talk about normalization with Israel if it agrees to an eventual Palestinian state. And clearly the Palestinian issue is very dear to the Arab public opinion or leadership opinion, and has been so for many, many years. With Iran, look, the Gulf states, the Saudis, the Emiratis, the Bahrainis, in a different way, the Qataris, they have frenemy relations with Iran. It's their next door regional power. It's been so for ages, for millennia, you can say. Sometimes partner, sometimes rival. And they don't want to put themselves into the place of being the targets of Iran. And so far, Iran has not threatened them. It has threatened the Americans, but not the Gulf states. Why would they want to be involved in this? I have no idea whether they're involved in giving early warning data or whatever. They're involved in protecting Israel in the same way that they were supposedly involved last year. But I understand why they're condemning it. It's a risk to them.
So
They don't want to be in the crosshairs.
fair enough. If we talk more about the international community's reactions so far, if we go to Europe, there's been quite a striking dualism because at the same time, just a week ago before history changed again, several EU states and the UK and Canada started using much more threatening language about Israel because of the war in Gaza, because of the fear of widespread starvation, and they were also imposing sanctions because of West Bank settler violence. But in terms of Iran, they have really mostly coalesced behind lockstep support for Israel. They're talking about Israel's right to self-defense and the need to eradicate Iran's military nuclear threat. And in fact, the Chancellor of Germany, Merz, said yesterday that Israel is doing the dirty work for all of us, as in it is confronting Iran on the nuclear issue, which is something that, is a collective good. So what explains this, radical difference?
I think there's stark difference between the two fronts. Even if many Israelis see Iran and Hamas as two faces of the same coin, they're not. In Gaza and in the West Bank, and especially since Israel breached the ceasefire with Hamas and relaunched the war on March 18th, Israel is seen as an occupying power that is, the spectrum of criticism of Israel ranges from calling it occupation and apartheid all the way to genocide. And this is very strong in the liberal public opinion all over the West. The Palestinians in Gaza cannot really defend themselves from IDF or fight back seriously, let alone in the West Bank. So this is not the case with Iran. Iran is a strong state. Iran developed its nuclear program against the will of the international community and especially the West. These governments have pledged time and again to prevent Iran from going nuclear. And Israel is not occupying Iran. Israel is not Iran has no moral claim against Israel. Iran decided to be the enemy of Israel and call for its destruction as a political decision, not because Israel has done anything. I mean, Israel was a very strong ally of the Shah regime that preceded the Iranian Islamic Revolution and the current Iranian regime. But that's not enough to justify firing missiles at Israel after 45 years. This is not the case. So clearly, Iran has no moral claim against Israel on this.
And what about Russia and China? There's the other superpowers that are lurking, or half superpowers lurking in the background. Russia is making more, noises said. In fact, the deputy foreign minister said today that, don't even consider to the US supplying direct military assistance to Israel.
Well, first of all, the Russia and China, Russia more than China, have been Iran's allies, but not in the same sort of Israeli-American alliance. And Russia, as we know, is stuck in its own war in Ukraine. It doesn't really have spare arms or missiles to give Iran. On the contrary, Iran supplied Russia with drones when they got into trouble at the beginning of the war, until they were able to build some drones on their own, develop and build on their own. And clearly they have overlapping, they have conflicting interests in terms of if it escalates into a regional war. Russia loves higher oil prices because its economy is built on oil exports and has been so since the discovery of oil 150 years ago or so. China, on the other hand, is a buyer of oil. So China and is a buyer, one of the biggest, if not the biggest buyer of oil from Iran. So for China, low oil prices are imperative, definitely when it's in a trade, fighting a trade war with the United States. So China would like to see the region calming down. Russia would like to see oil prices going up. So there, and I think both are committed to reaching a nuclear deal with Iran.
So I wanted to ask about the slide.
And by the way, I don't see. I mean, I don't see that. And again, the starkest difference here is that while Trump is talking about joining the war alongside Israel, I don't know of any talk or thinking of Russian or Chinese forces joining the Iranians to fight Israel or the United States. So
No.
it is a very, very, very different kind of alliance or support that we see here. And Putin, by the way, I think from day one or day two, suggested to be the mediator between Trump, Israel, and the Iranian leadership.
Yes, in fact, Trump mentioned that today, that his friend Vladimir had offered to be a mediator, and he told him, go off and deal with your own problems. Now, there has been a bit of a slide in some of the rhetoric. I know that you don't love the public messaging stuff, but some of the rhetoric used by Israeli leaders recently, they are talking as much about degrading Iran's nuclear capacities as suggesting that it's a good time for a regime change in Tehran as well. You have Netanyahu making his various video appeals to the Iranian people. He's talking to Iran International, which is a channel that it supports the dissidents. Israel's foreign minister, who is of very little use except for his so-called public messaging, says, the targets that Israel is striking now, are symbols of the Ayatollah's regime, and this is how dictatorships collapse. So it's gone from, hinting that it would be a good time for the Iranian people to rise up, to kind of making it almost one of the war aims. Now, is this all talk, or really is this fundamentally part of what this attack on Iran is about?
Well, there's been a streak in Israeli officialdom for many, many years, calling to be more proactive in undermining and bringing down the regime in Iran. The late Uri Lobrani was the last Israeli ambassador to the Shah, and he has made his fame by predicting the collapse of the Shah regime about a year before it happened, warning against it where nobody else was listening. So for many, many years, he was saying that all we need to do is to invest in better radio, like Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty against the Soviet Union, Radio Free Iran, and convince the Iranian people to rise up against the regime, which, by the way, they tried even before the Arab Spring. Was the failed Green Revolution in Iran in 2009, and then was the Mahsa Amini protest 3 years ago that failed and were cracked down very brutally by the government. I'm not sure whether, I mean, I think that the idea that Israel could bomb the Iranian regime out of existence is too far-fetched and too overblown. Israel is too weak to achieve that. I don't know that it has allies inside the border. And the suspicion in Israel is that just like the ultimate victory against Hamas and the hope of the government that 2 million Palestinians from Gaza would somehow be relocated to other places, that the call to replace the regime is just an excuse to prolong the war for as long as possible, which is good for Netanyahu politically. Because if the nuclear program is done away with a couple of more long-range bombings, then what's the next day? That's the flip side of it. At the same time, the Iranian regime is not very popular in Israel or around the world, and it's one more way to attract to gain support.
Well, I mean, if we're talking about, whether or not this is kind of baked into some kind of open-ended idea of how the war will ever end. I mean, what did Israel come into this war with Iran? What was the definition of success that it wanted to see by the end of it? Because it's not been extraordinarily clear to members of the Israeli public when it would be the moment that the government would say, yes, we've won, we've done what we came to do, which obviously then slides into this fear of, that there is no specific end.
I'll do the most unpunditry thing, which is to say, I don't know what they expected because I was not privy to their planning. Look, in the Middle East, there's never, and you can argue that there's never anywhere else ultimate victory where they just like in ancient times where the enemy is just disappearing. Late Prime Minister Rabin, when he was leading the Israeli Defense Ministry and IDF for many, many years, he argued that in the Middle East, the definition of victory is when the other side begs for ceasefire. And during this war, it happened with Hezbollah. Hezbollah joined Hamas a day after by attacking the northern part of Israel. Israel evacuated the border communities. And for a year, almost a year, there was exchange of fire along the border. And throughout this time, Israel negotiated through the Biden administration efforts to reach ceasefire with Hezbollah separately from Hamas. And Hezbollah refused, and they said, we will fight alongside our brothers in Gaza and support them, and we will not reach a separate deal, which they did after being decapitated by the IDF. So if Iran asks for ceasefire and agrees to negotiate with the United States to dismantle its nuclear program, as Trump demanded, and they refused before this happened, then this could be the outcome if Trump accepts that Israel would not be able to keep fighting. So I think this is a possible diplomatic outcome of this war. But so far, both sides pledged to keep fighting. Israel until the end of the regime, Iran until the end of what they call the Zionist regime. Israel, we'll see. But I think this is the most reasonable outcome, is when one side begs for ceasefire and the other side accepts it. In this case, the final word is not Israel's, it's Trump's. I saw that one of the member of the audience here asked, who is Iran supposed to surrender to? I think it's the United States, because the negotiations were not with Israel. The pre-war negotiations between Steve Witkoff, the American envoy, and Arakchi, the Iranian foreign minister. And the American side demanded to halt all uranium enrichment in Iran, giving away whatever they enriched, and being able to receive enriched uranium for electricity production from original consortium, for even cheap energy. And they refused. They said that enriching uranium is a national right that they would never give up. If they do, it's going to be very difficult for Israel to justify fighting to relieve the poor Iranian people from their regime. This is
Okay.
not going to be
I mean,
accepted.
apart from the fact that, Iranian officials are saying today, no Iranian official will ever grovel at the gates of the White House, which I thought was a great quote. But
Yeah.
but then what you're saying is, in some ways, Israel might be playing its part in what has been called, extreme coercive diplomacy in terms of forcing Iran to the table in terms of its enrichment capabilities, which it, as you say, flat out refused to do during its negotiations, the five
With one
rounds with
addition.
Witkoff.
With one addition, Netanyahu also demanded that you do away with the Iran ballistic missile program,
Well,
and
we're
which
getting
was
rid
not
of some of
part.
them as we speak.
Yeah. We were almost late for the webinar because I was at home and preparing to come here, and when the sirens hit, but all the missiles were intercepted, so we could start on time. But if Israel for years demanded to have the Iranian missile program also as part of international supervision and arms control, and there was not interested in that. The superpowers were willing to deal with the Iranian nuclear program, not so much with the ballistic missiles. And although it remains to be seen whether there would be more open ear to discuss it later. But then again, we assume that the Iranians surrender and agree to give away their nuclear program. So far, they're all but preparing to fight a long war, and they recall the Iran-Iraq war where they fought for 8 years against Saddam Hussein and lost. By the way, at that time they surrendered unconditionally when Iran was hit by Iraqi ballistic missiles and had no proper defenses or shelters or anything.
So, and you offered earlier today some other examples of when a state or a leader in the Middle East can be bombed into capitulation.
Well, I think there's for almost 100 years since the conceptualization of air power by Dewey and Mitchell and the forerunners in the interwar period in Europe and America. There's been a debate whether you can win a war by air power alone. And as you know, it was tried in the Second World War and failed. In Europe, it succeeded somewhat horribly in Japan by using nuclear weapons. And since then, this debate's been going on. It succeeded in the Kosovo War in 1999, when NATO used only air power without ground forces to drive the Serbs out of Kosovo and eventually bring about a regime change in Serbia as well, and the trial of Milosevic, of the Serbian leader. It succeeded not just by air power, but mostly by air power in 1991 in the first Gulf War. And the Americans were able to drive Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait, but also to impose Resolution 687, which was the dismantlement of Iraq's special weapons and long-range missiles programs under UN supervision, which was very successful. In 2003, the US came again, and they did not find anything, although they believed that Saddam was developing, or they were selling the world the story that Saddam was developing these weapons of mass destruction again. So theoretically, and Saddam had 12 more years in power until the US occupied Iraq and dismantled the Ba'ath state. And the same was true in Syria. When Assad used chemical weapons against the anti-government rebels in 2013, the US threatened him with bombs and bombing him out of office or assisting the rebels. And in the last minute, they negotiated a deal to do away with the Syrian chemical weapons under UN supervision. It was very successful. There have been reports of residual chemical weapons in Syria, but still, after that happened, Israel dismantled its program of supplying gas masks to the entire Israeli population. That was mostly due to Iraqi and then Syrian chemical weapons. And again, Assad bought another over 10 years in office, which he lost not because of bombing, but because of other factors. So theoretically, you can do away with and again, if the main problem is the Iranian special weapons, the Iranian regime is a problem mostly for Iranians, not for the others. If you do away with its long-range missiles, with its nuclear program, with other special weapons that they might have, then everybody in the Middle East, apart from the poor Iranian citizens, is far more secure. But can Israel really do it? Can Israel do it without the United States? Can Israel and the United States do it without dragging the entire region or the entire world into catastrophe? These are the hours of decision.
Thanks for that context about how bad this could actually get. But let's say that the Iranians are not interested in negotiations, at least for now. I mean, how long can Israel sustain its efforts? Bearing in mind it's already still fighting in Gaza on another front as well, although it is reducing somewhat its forces there. Although, it's not boots on the ground in Iran.
No, in Iran, it's not boots on the ground. In Iran,
it's done by the Air Force. But how long can Israel both sustain its attacks but also defend the home front effectively?
The two weak points, the key points for Israel is the strength of its air defenses, of its missile defense systems, operationally and psychologically, sociologically, economically, the suffering in the home front. And clearly Israelis are not prepared, even after 20 months or almost 21 months of fighting against Hamas, and for a long part of that period against Hezbollah as well. This is different. The devastation of the Iranian missiles, the destruction in Petah Tikva, in Bat Yam, in Tel Aviv, in Haifa, is something that Israelis have never seen before. Images of Kiev, of Kharkiv, this is something that we've never seen before, even by Iraqi missiles, by missiles from Gaza, from Lebanon. This is unprecedented. So it's not something that Israelis would like to sustain forever or for a long period, or until the Iranian regime is replaced, or until we have eternal peace and fix global warming as well. So you cannot judge this war only by the numbers of casualties or numbers of missiles exchange or the number of Iranian officials killed by Israel or facilities taken out of service. It's far more destructive, and we have a public in Israel that is war weary after almost 2 years, in which many people have been hundreds of days during their reserve duty, in which we still see military funerals. We still have the hostages in Gaza. We have the Gazans, that is, Israeli public opinion cares less about the plight, or most of it cares less about the plight of the Palestinians, but still, it's still something that Israel has to deal with. It's not over. And therefore, I believe that Israel will try, or I hope it would try to end this conflict with Iran as soon as possible and reach some sort of deal, and then reach a ceasefire and hostage exchange deal in Gaza as well, and focus its energy on rebuilding Israel from the destruction and damage and public rift of the past 2.5 years.
Well, I think on that note, thank you very much, Aluf Benn, and thank you everyone who has attended this special briefing, and we'll let you know when the next one is. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Esther, and thanks the audience.